Welcome to Behind the Event, a podcast that dives deep into the event industry. I'm Eric Westendorf, the founder of EventRender. The podcast is brought to you by EventRender. We help you run profitable virtual and live events through exceptional design. Be sure to check out our helpful event applications and design services at eventrender.com. Also, be sure to subscribe and like on whichever platform you use for podcasting, or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe and like there. And now we bring you Behind the Event. So today, basically, we're going to talk about live streaming virtual events and the future of our industry, the event industry, which has gone through a lot of changes. Nick Bacon is the founder of Mainstream Media, and he's dealt with the issues that we've all dealt with, and he's got definitely some knowledge that I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in. And so awesome to have you here. And
thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah. So I'll let you take it from here, just as far as your story. So could we hear sort of about your story as well as the company story? What your goals are? What you've done? Where you're going?
Yeah, for sure. My background is in traditional video production and cinematography. You know, I graduated with a cinematography degree back in 2008. Right at the height of the recession, so great time to come out of school with an arts degree and a Latin degree was my second degree. So real burgeoning fields in the middle of what seemed like a pretty bad recession back then. I worked for a while just in video production and in various positions as a director, producer, cam op, basically anything that I could get my hands on and get dirty with. I was always really interested in having my hands on the actual devices and kind of being in control of that. Always behind the camera, never really in front of it. But spent a good amount of time doing that, and eventually made my way out to Chicago, where a buddy of mine and I started our video production company. And what I quickly learned about Chicago is that it's a very relationship-based city. I think like a lot of big cities, the way you kind of rise up there is by who you know. And so as an introvert, the process of networking and meeting a bunch of people was really challenging to me. And so it was hard for me to kind of break into the right circles. But video production is like what I know how to do. It's kind of the only thing I know how to do at this point. So I knew that I wanted to stay in that field, and after talking about it for a while, my buddy Drew and I decided that what we were going to do was find a niche inside video production that not as many people were doing, but we felt like maybe people would be doing more of. This was back in 2012, 2011. And so we decided to focus on live streaming. We had a few clients who had asked us to do webinars and e-learning and little events, things like that. And every time we did it, it was a big, crazy process, like just a real cluster trying to figure out how to do it. Again, back in 2011, things were like a little bit different than the landscape was very different, right? So there was no YouTube Live, there was no Facebook Live. Every time we had to do it, we had to kind of start from scratch and rebuild. But we learned pretty quickly that that was a good space to explore and to grow, because really the only folks who were doing that, who were live streaming to the web, were these like big broadcast companies like NBC, and affiliates like that. They were the ones who were working with clients to broadcast stuff to the web, and they were charging NBC rates, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, whatever it is. And me and Drew, we were like two hungry young kids. We're like, well, I mean, we're doing this. We can do the same thing, just the two of us, with some of the newer technology out there for like a fraction of the cost. So we started doing more and more jobs, kind of learning on the way. Once YouTube Live became a thing, that was the first kind of inflection point that I noticed in the industry. People were like, oh, I can go live on YouTube. Like maybe I'm going to do my conference live on YouTube. Maybe I'm going to do a press conference. So we started seeing more people kind of explore it. So that was kind of a big building point for us. And then once Facebook opened up live streaming, once Facebook Live became a thing in 2015, somewhere around there, that's when the floodgates kind of broke, and everyone started requesting it. So at that point, we were really well positioned because we had been doing it for about 4 years at that point. We had a good system in place. And so we kind of rode that social live wave for a while, really until about 3 months ago, March of 2020, and that was the last. That's the latest big inflection point in our industry. I think up until that point, we were kind of viewed as an ancillary in the events industry. So we would partner with a lot of event producers, organizers, folks who were putting on live events in a real space. And they would call us in to figure out how to get their content onto Facebook Live, onto YouTube, onto private platforms, whatever. But once COVID hit, we kind of became the event producers because it was all in a virtual space. So we had that expertise. And so that pretty much brings us up to where we are today. Now we're a virtual event production company predominantly. We're starting to get more requests back for that kind of live streaming stuff. But really, I think from this point forward for us, the focus is virtual events. How do you do them? How do you build audiences with people who aren't in a physical space, getting them to interact and engage, and ultimately just create a connection with the brand or the nonprofit or whoever it is that we're working with.
Right. Is there a specific element around all that your clients and people that you've talked to and work with are most confused about? Like, is there some part of your work that people that misunderstand the most, when it comes to all this stuff? Because it is fairly tech savvy stuff, and everyone's shifting.
Yeah, it's super tech heavy stuff, and even more so now. Our producers are often having to kind of be these dual roles where they're not only producing a show, but they're kind of like IT support for folks. I think that's been the most confusing thing for people is like because everyone's on their home networks now, they kind of have to learn how to manage their own network. And that's especially when you're working with speakers and C-level executives, folks like that. Those are folks who probably haven't had that experience in a long time. Even if they're working in a tech industry, that's mostly handled for them. So, a lot of the work that we do is like in tech checks, being on calls with like the CEO of some publicly traded company and being like, okay, so this is what your router is. And I'm going to need you to take that blue wire and make sure that it's plugged in from your computer to your router. And then sometimes getting more complicated than that. But like, this whole kind of new universe where like your broadcast department is also your IT department is, that's been a technical challenge.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we're experiencing is like the difference between what a Zoom room is and what a broadcast is. Mm-hmm. A lot of people in virtual events leverage tools like Zoom to pull in speakers and then design a show around it. That's not always intuitive for the speakers themselves. Oftentimes their experience is inside of Zoom. And so they're kind of experiencing the event as if it were a Zoom call with a bunch of people on. But then the audience, the thousands of people who are watching, are not in that Zoom room. They are on YouTube, on Facebook, on someone's website, and they're not seeing, the grid or the spotlighted videos. They're seeing whatever it is that we're sending to them, which is often, multiple feeds simultaneously and stuff like that. So there's definitely been learning for just the average panelist presenter about how this all works.
Yeah. Because there's always going to be things in the background that are happening the end user isn't going to understand, and it a lot of times is too tough to explain it. So you just like
It's just going to work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like, nor should they be expected to understand or like run their own IT department.
Yeah.
And I think we're okay. Like, I feel okay helping people with that, because every person that I talk to is like, there is so much that they're talking about that is just completely over my head. I have no idea what they're talking about. And like, I mean, that's the thing. Everybody specializes, right?
Right. Definitely. Yep. Are you finding that now that COVID is happening, we can start to talk about this a little bit more. Now that things have changed, are you finding that you have to implement stuff within the spaces that they're already in, or how is that working with what you guys do? Like, I know some companies are sending equipment to other, to where their clients are and whatnot. How do you guys tackle all that?
Yeah, we as a company had a conversation about this in March to decide what we wanted to do, and we ultimately decided that at least up until now, up until this point, like today, July 17th, we are not physically going on site.
Okay.
So we've just decided that like it's too much of a health risk. Nobody from mainstream, nobody like with a mainstream email address is going on site anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that at the start of July, end of June, we were thinking about it. We're like, well, maybe things are going to get better, and so we can start to have conversations about what like things look like if we go back. But obviously, we've seen huge spikes over the last few weeks because people aren't following the instructions that are given to them about wearing masks publicly and things like that. So we are continuing to just stay remote. That means that we've had to take our entire workflow and figure out how to do that remotely. As a team, we had a couple of advantages with that. My team is based in Chicago. I now live in Richmond, Virginia. And so we have had to figure out how to work remotely. We had to figure that out about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago when I first moved here. So we kind of we had a little bit of a head start with that. And we've always had flexible time for employees in terms of like, if you're not required to be in the office, then you can work from home. There's no obligation for people to be in the office just to send emails or whatever. So most everyone had office space at home already. But there's just a ton of compromises that you have to make when you move to a remote workflow. I mean, we were used to using our $15,000 camera packages for a live show, and a $15,000 camera package gives you a certain quality of image. Now we're lucky if people have an external USB webcam. And so it's been a little bit of kind of compromising with ourselves on quality. And then, but that forces us to think about like what is truly important for a show. And also how do we, if that level of quality is important for a show, how do we get there even around a remote workflow? And so that occasionally means sending gear packages out to people and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Overall, the message and the content that they're going for is the most important part of it all. Right.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, content is king, right? We want to be putting out as high quality content as possible, especially right now because all of a sudden
versus the production quality, two different things to a degree. Right.
I mean, I'm thinking about production quality as well, right? Like quality of production is a really good way to differentiate yourself from what everyone else is doing, right? And so over the last 4 months, we've seen a huge influx of virtual events because the entire events industry has moved online. And we're seeing a lot of people who are experimenting with it, and whether it's maybe they're hosting their first Zoom event, maybe they're going live on Facebook for the first time. So we've done a lot of work to help clients distinguish themselves, to say like, this isn't new to us. We are executing at this level. So that's been big for us.
Gotcha. Okay. Just a couple quick questions here more around what you guys do again, and the things that you've noticed with what you've been doing. So are there any tips or tricks that you could give to people, let's say they're your clients or anyone in general that might need to think about, or that's good to think about when you're wanting to stream more? That anyone can do, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so for us, I think there's like a couple of ways to shake this question, and I'll give you like an insider tip. I'll give, like, everyone should know this. When you are watching a virtual event, 80% of the content that you're seeing right now is pre-recorded. Mm-hmm. If you're watching
that was going to be one of my next questions, is pre-recorded versus live.
I mean, you have to control what you can control, right? Yeah. And if the message is important and interaction is less important, then absolutely, like, pre-record the content and then stream it out. Yeah. You're going to have much better quality. Like, you're not going to have internet drops, things like that. So that's one thing. Whatever you can pre-record, do it. The second thing is when you do a live show, it should not be the first time you're doing that show. So for us, whenever we have a virtual event, we will have our event. We will have a tech rehearsal the day before where we will literally go cue to cue, and we will do the entire show with everybody there to make sure that everything is practiced and rehearsed. Right. Because transitions can feel a little bit strange in the digital space. Yep. Because you're introducing just slight degrees of latency depending on
would you say you treat this just like a live event then, and that you need to rehearse in the same manner?
It's the same concept, right? Like, you don't want your show day to be the first day you've done the show.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, you're doing those tech rehearsals beforehand. I would say that, like, we've taken that kind of on-site process and turned it into a virtual space. The part that is where virtual events are, like, way more challenging now is, it used to be the case that, like, you could get everybody into a room together and you could go through your show, right? And so, like, everybody kind of practices together. Now everybody is apart, and so you have to connect with people individually. And, like, if you have 10 presenters, you often have to go through the show 10 times. So the amount of work has, like, way increased, which was actually a surprise to me when I was first thinking about virtual events. I was like, oh, this is going to be way easier. Like, I'm just going to be at home all day and I'll just be able to run an event. But no, there's a lot more work that goes into it, it turns out.
Would you say that the rehearsal part is in a way the most important part? I was going to ask you, what do you think the most important part of the whole thing is? Or would you say it's everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's proper preparation, right? If you don't prepare for a show correctly, then, like, your show isn't guaranteed to be a success, right? And so, yeah, it's the whole process leading up to it. Right. The tech rehearsal is super important, but, like, the tech checks are also important. Connecting with each presenter independently before the tech rehearsal to, like, make sure their internet is good, make sure their camera is good. If you do that legwork at the front, then you're gonna have a good show.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. I think a lot of people tend to not think it's as important, but it's huge, right? Especially with just the comfort of everyone that's doing it, whether it's the presenters and the people in the background, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think a lot of people in my position, in the kind of, like, technical producing roles, a lot of folks are going to say it's the gear that's important, which, like, to an extent is true, but my perspective is that gear is only as good as the engineer who is running it. And so in this new virtual space, like, a brand spanking new ROS switcher is not going to function all that differently than OBS or vMix or software switchers like that. So long as you're running that software on the right hardware,
Yep.
then you can produce the same type of show that is going on ESPN or any live content that you see on TV. Because for the most part, those people are actually using the same tools as us now, which I think is kind of funny.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to have. I've noticed the same thing with a lot of different parts of the industry, or the production industry, where it's you used to have the best audio equipment or something. But in general now, there's definitely ways to get around that, especially if you're doing a smaller production. I mean, if you're doing the Super Bowl, you might want a lot more, but
I mean, even looking at the Super Bowl as an example, right? ESPN did the draft day a couple of months ago,
right.
And they used open source, off the shelf, free software that you can download to your iPhone. They had 100 iPhones, all running Larix Broadcaster, all tied into a cloud-based studio, and it's the exact same setup that all of us are using, or that many of us are familiar with at this point. So even ESPN is hacking it together a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the best engineers in the industry, don't get me wrong, so a hack for them is a doctorate for us, but it's still that's the point, is the tools don't matter so much as the engineers behind it.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I could definitely see that. I was just going to say too, the fact that I learned more and more that some of the largest companies and whatnot are using apps like Zoom. They don't necessarily have a better version, and Zoom does what it does well, and other platforms as well too. So it's not odd to hear that some broadcasts might have been done with potentially Zoom in the background.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think talking about Zoom for just a second.
Yeah, go for it.
Obviously, there's a ton of concerns about the security of the platform. There are two things that you can do that will 100% eliminate Zoom bombing. The first is always have a password, and the second is always enable a waiting room.
Okay.
And if you do those things, then you will not get Zoom bombed.
They won't be able to come in if you have a waiting room, or, like you said, a password.
Right, exactly. Waiting room, you have to manually approve everybody who's coming in. So.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Good things to think about for sure. I think now also when you set up Zoom, it automatically has the waiting room in it, I believe.
By default?
Probably maybe that's something they changed because of that.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that platform is wild. I look forward to reading the retrospective on what happened at that place during this time. It does feel like it's changing a little bit every day. So it's actually kind of hard running broadcasts on it, because you expect it to behave in a certain way, and then you're like, oh, that doesn't work anymore, or that button prompts people instead of automatically doing the thing. So wish they had told me about that, but that's cool.
Yeah, it's just a surprise each time you...
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to go a little bit into kind of more of just the future of the industry and just get your take on everything. I'm sure a lot of it is, sort of straightforward. Obviously everyone's hoping for the best and whatnot, but of course this time just makes you think about different things that could happen. A lot of companies are trying new things and whatnot. Including us. And so I just want to get your take on the future and just your perspective on what you think's happening.
Yeah.
So I could go through just a couple questions. In general, you did say that, 3 or 4 months ago, you had to kind of switch over most of your business. Is there anything else aside from switching that over that affected, that COVID-19 affected your business, aside from just your client base and that, to change your overall perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had experience doing virtual events prior to COVID, so it wasn't like a super new process to us. But given the option between producing an on-site event and a remote event, a virtual event, had you asked me that 3 months ago, 100% of the time I would have been more comfortable doing something on-site. That's just like a really tried and true workflow.
Sure. Yeah.
What I'm seeing now is that virtual events in many ways can be a better experience than in-person events.
Yeah.
And I think that I think it's tapping into a different type of audience, right? Like in-person events, if you're an extrovert, then it's great. And this pandemic has been hell for you, and I am sorry. But if you're an introvert, it is work to go to these kinds of things. So being able to attend events kind of on your own terms has really opened up the event space for this massive group of people that have traditionally had difficulty going to events. So that's been really eye-opening to me.
Cost alone, if you can't afford to go to the event, potentially, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that's another thing too. Is event producers don't have to consider space rental. They don't have to consider catering. Design is kind of virtual design, right? So instead of having set decoration, you may be hiring a web developer. So I think that there's a lot of value in exploring virtual events and kind of continuing to explore it. And that was not surprising to me, but it was eye-opening to me, like how drastic the difference was.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I think you answered a couple of questions there too, because I was going to ask what you're most excited about, and in a way, it's if you want to add anything to that, you definitely can. But it sounds like you definitely mentioned that there's a few things there that open up opportunities for people and as well as clients. So.
Well, I think one other point that I want to make is like we are experiencing a pandemic, and I think a lot of the focus kind of in this industry has been on that. But there has also been a history of systemic abuse of like underrepresented people, of blacks and minorities in America, and like that is also something that we are experiencing right now, and in no way should be diminished by conversations around the pandemic. When we talk about like the future of the industries, both like events industries, broadcasting, I think I hope at least that people are waking up to the fact that minorities are extremely underrepresented in positions of power in events industries and in broadcast. And I am hoping that this is a wake-up call for people to start bringing in a wider, a more diverse group of people. I mean, I do a lot of like spreadsheet crunching and like just kind of looking at trends and analytics. And a couple of years ago, just like went through LinkedIn and looked at the top 50 video production companies in 5 different geographies, and found that on average they were hiring about 3% of their workforce was black, which in the U.S. the black population is like 13 to 14%, I think. So there's this huge underrepresentation from minority communities, and I think that when we talk about like the future of these industries, I hope that is something that people are focusing on now as well.
I think it's a great point. Overall, I think the door has opened a bit in as far as people, companies, anyone that wants to try something within this industry, because it is changing. A lot of industries are changing, right? But our industry is definitely like, well, it's not going to get back to what it was for quite a while. So like we have a huge door or window for a while of things that you could potentially do, which is awesome. And
For sure.
yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of it is just making sure that those opportunities get in front of everyone equally.
definitely, totally,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Mm.
Is there anything on the other end, the flip side of things, that you're concerned about with the future of the industry, as far as things just looking? I don't want to be fear mongering or anything like that, but
Yeah.
just the downsides, things that are harder to overcome, whether it's technically, things might be just slower to move because of the way things are. I mean, I'm pretty optimistic about things in general, but have
Sure.
you noticed anything that your customers are saying, or anything else that might be lacking?
Well, I know that a week or two ago, I was looking at the box office charts, and I think the number one movie in America had about $200,000 in ticket sales, which is maybe 0.1% of what the number one grossing movie was at this time last year. So for sure, there's going to be
straight to Netflix now. Then
yeah, or like drive-throughs are, I guess, making a big comeback, which is pretty rad.
Yeah.
So, like, for sure, there is going to be long-term impact here.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are massive events companies like Freeman and PSAV who have had to lay off tens of thousands of employees.
Yeah.
And so that is extremely disheartening. My hope is that the government does something to like make sure that people are cared for and provided for in this time of transition. I think that's my biggest concern is like we don't really know when this is going to be over. We don't know when the events industry is going to be back to the level it was, or the film industry or broadcast. And we have 50 million people who have dropped out of the workforce, right? Like 1/3 of the U.S. labor force is now unemployed.
Yeah.
So my biggest fear is that the U.S. government doesn't do enough to support those people in the time of transition, and I really hope that they do.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There's basically, the rug has been taken from underneath a lot of people, and there's absolutely no way to just jump back on board. For a while, if you've devoted a lot of your time to the event industry or any other industry that's gotten affected like it has with us, then you can't just transition super quickly a lot of times. So
yeah, and like this summer has been a terrible case study in that, where like states are aggressively trying to reopen and restaurants are doing so, and then seeing a huge uptick in cases, and then they're having to close back down, right? So now we're kind of in this like second wave of things shutting down, and it's just like, people are trying to rush back into this because people need to work, which is true. Like we need to like have a labor force, and so people need to be able to support themselves, but like the way that it's happening is not really thinking about public health first. It's more kind of focused on the economy, and that's been tough.
Yeah, we'll see how all of it plays out. It's coming on the end of July, so we'll see where we are in a few months, and hopefully things have with the curve have gone down, and we're all just figuring out a way to be smarter about it. And then also hopefully, like you said, the government is able to put some actions in place so we can actually be healthy. So just two more quick questions. We'll try to end on a positive note.
Sure. Sorry to be a Debbie Downer.
Right.
I guess, it is a pandemic right now, so.
Yeah. One quick one, like how do you continue to, obviously things are changing right now, so how do you continue to sort of stay on top of things and learn and grow and all that stuff? I mean, there's so much stuff out there, like this podcast that I'm putting out.
Sure.
So what do you do, and everyone's probably different, but what do you do to typically try to stay on top of things?
Um, yeah, I'm trying to have more active conversations with with folks whose opinions I trust.
Sure.
So it's just like reaching out to content experts who like clearly kind of know their stuff and following the stuff that is right, and not getting distracted by the things that are maybe new or spurious.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I've seen is like over the last 3 months, we were talking about this yesterday, is like how many new virtual events
A
platforms
lot.
have you seen in the last 90 days that you've never heard of before,
Okay.
right? I've hundreds maybe. So, you know, I think that's kind of a big part of it is like figuring out who to trust. And for me, I trust my team first. So talking to all the folks that I'm working with at Mainstream, that's super important, and just kind of having those open lines of communication. But then also just building community with folks who are kind of in a similar space. And I think that's another place where I've really learned a lot is starting to build like a Slack channel of other people who are experiencing this alongside of me, other virtual event producers and technical directors, folks who have been doing this who aren't just 60 days into their virtual event production career, but who have been doing it for a long time.
Yep.
And just like talking to them and being like, hey, like, what are you noticing? What are the right platforms to use? What is how do we integrate like SRT into a workflow or NDI over IP or like all of these different protocols? Like what are the strategies that you're using? So it's kind of like building that brain trust, I think has been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I would jump on the same boat and say that, I've been trying to talk with as many people as I can and actually grow like a deeper understanding for what other people are doing and how they're working and basically make more connections because, the deeper you go, I think the more you can learn and figure out ways to navigate what the heck is going on.
Yeah. At the start of this, like the very first thing that I did when we shuttered our doors is I just like sent out a message across Facebook and Instagram, like all the different places that I kind of talk to people, and I was like, let's all get together and just like talk about this. And for 4 weeks, I had 16 meetings a day, 16 half-hour meetings a day, with different people in various parts of the industry, events, broadcast, IT, AV, and just like listening.
Yeah,
just being like,
that's great.
How has this impacted you? So that was really kind of helpful for me, I think. Just listening to people.
I'm sure you learned quite a bit, quite a bit of different stories probably too. I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I learned what my like tolerance for Zoom calls is, like how many I can do in a day. Turns out 16 was aggressive. That was too.
So I guess it's a little different if you're listening as opposed to. It depends on the person you are too, but either way.
Yeah.
So quickly, last question. This may be hard for you to answer. I don't really know. I think I would have a hard time maybe with it. If you had an extra $500K in your budget, how would you spend it and why?
That is a challenging question. I think that
you could make up a different number too if something is more ideal.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I'm seeing right now is like, I work with a ton of AV companies and events companies who have millions of dollars invested in their gear.
Yeah.
And all of that gear is just sitting in a warehouse right now collecting dust.
Right.
And so making those investments in like making those capital investments right now feels like a tough thing to do.
Sure.
I'm more interested in spending money on, I think, the like softer sciences, marketing, development, building out our own products, and really just kind of strengthening or expanding what we already have.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the same exact thing. I think figuring out more about what you're doing, how you can be better at it, and then basically creating a better service and product for your own customer in general as well.
Yeah, and I'd probably if like a bucket of $500,000 dropped into my lap, I would probably just pay to get fiber lines installed to all my tech director's house, just so we have that as a backup. I think
and then you could just tell all of your customers that they're never going to have to leave because you have the best internet around.
That's right. I own the internet. These are my pipes.
Yeah, once you experience fiber and stuff, it's like, wow, I didn't even know this was possible.
Yeah. It's like I remember going from dial-up to cable in like whatever it was, 99, 2000, something like that, and it was just like entering the Matrix.
Yeah.
There is so much information available at my fingertips now.
I actually have one more quick question that just made me think of this, but are you like well versed in what's happening with the 5G rollout with cell towers and whatnot? I'm not super well versed in it, but just thought, because that's basically going to allow cellular data to have a huge jump, right? So
yeah, I haven't been following it extremely closely, just kind of catching pieces of it here and there. I mean, look, having more bandwidth available for the type of stuff that we're doing is fantastic.
Yeah.
Thumbs up across the board for that. Cellular has always been a bit challenging as like a reliable source, and often in our industry, if you're doing virtual events and you're on a cell network, it's part of a bonded solution, so you're tying in multiple cell networks, tying them into your hardline to like supplement. I think that there's challenges with 5G like at the start, and so it's not going to be something that like Gen 1 we jump onto.
Yeah.
Just because even on like 4G, I mean, I'm sure that like in events you've experienced this, right? Where like a bunch of people show up and then there's no cell signal, right? Because they're all hitting the same tower.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a question of like availability.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not something that we're going to like rely on, but
that's interesting. Yeah. So it's not like a necessarily going to solve everything by any means.
Wouldn't that be great?
Right. I mean, a lot of times hype grows around stuff like that, right? Where it's like, oh, everything will be possible once this happens, but it's like, maybe not.
No. Yeah. I mean, there's like that conversation happens a couple times a week with all the different things that are happening.
Sure,
like people are super jazzed on SRT delivery in our industry, which is secure, reliable transport. It's like low latency, high quality video feeds. But the rollout of that has been challenging. Obviously, not every device accepts it, and so but like for some people, that was like the gold standard. Once SRT happened, then we were like, okay, we're good. We can watch stuff in HD again. So yeah, I don't know. There's always something, right? 5G, bring it on. Sounds great. Can't wait.
I'm sure it'll be at least somewhat better.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyways, thanks a bunch for talking here. Again, this is Nick Bacon with Mainstream Media. So go ahead and check his stuff out. And hope for the best and keep in contact. And thanks again. Great talking to you.
For sure. Thanks, Eric. It was nice chatting with you as well.
Yeah.
We'll talk soon.
Thanks for watching or listening today. If you would like to hear any more or watch any more in the future, just go ahead and subscribe, whichever podcasting platform you listen to or watch. We post on YouTube as well as many other podcasting platforms. And if you have any questions for us, just go ahead and go over to eventrender.com and you can send us a message through our website there. Thanks and take care.